It's late, but we're not done yet. Because what's happening in this global trade war right now is absolutely staggering. The world's two biggest powers are clashing again, and this time, the outcome isn't what Washington expected. For years, American leaders talked tough, throwing out threats, tariffs, and bold promises. But now, those words are starting to look empty, because the numbers tell a very different story. One where Beijing is quietly pulling ahead while Washington scrambles to catch up. Trump keeps repeating the same pledge: bring manufacturing home, restore the chip industry, make America the center of advanced technology again. It sounds great in a speech, but there's a catch. The lifeblood of those industries, the raw materials that power everything from electric vehicles to fighter jets, are almost completely in China's hands. From lithium and graphite to the rare earth minerals hidden deep in the ground, Beijing dominates the global supply. The United States might build the factories, but it can't build without the ingredients, and those come almost entirely from China. Think about it. Around 70% of America's rare earth imports still arrive from Chinese ports. For some elements like scandium, the US depends on Beijing completely. These aren't luxury goods or optional resources. They're the foundation of every modern technology, from EV motors and missile guidance systems to the magnets that run advanced aircraft. Without them, high-tech dreams collapse before they start. Even if the US bought up Japan's entire reserves, prices would still explode. Because losing 70% of your global source overnight is economic suicide. But here's where it gets worse. Every time Washington tries to look strong, it ends up rattling its own markets. Investors panic, stocks drop, and confidence disappears. Just last week, US indexes fell by over 4%, wiping billions off the board in a single trading day. The rebound we're seeing now isn't a comeback. It's damage control. Behind the scenes, Trump's team is in full scramble mode. Suddenly, the same politicians who once pushed for a full-blown trade war are now pleading for stability and calm with Beijing. The tone has flipped overnight, and that tells you everything you need to know. Let's rewind for a moment. The US started this fight with sanctions, tariffs, and restrictions aimed directly at China's technology industry. Then it moved on to shipping, supply chains, and even financial pressure. But now that China's hitting back, cutting exports, tightening supply, and redirecting its markets, Washington's starting to realize how deep the trap goes. Trump's social media posts say it all. He writes about helping China, not hurting it, calling for mutual recovery. That's not strategy. That's surrender disguised as diplomacy. If you're sitting in Beijing reading that, you're not worried. You're smiling. Because you can see that the other side is blinking first. China's response has been cold, calculated, and incredibly strategic. It's cutting its dependence on US goods, locking down critical industries, and tightening control over supply chains that the rest of the world still needs. While American politicians argue over tweets and tariffs, China is strengthening its factories, expanding its mining operations, and building alliances that will outlast this trade war. The rare earth market is only the beginning. Whoever controls it controls the future of technology. That's why no major Asian country, not Japan, not South Korea, not Taiwan, is moving its production lines to the US. They've run the numbers. It's too costly, too unstable, and far too risky. And while everyone's focused on semiconductors and batteries, something even bigger is unfolding. Agriculture. In September, China's soybean imports hit a record high, almost 13 million tons. But here's the shocker. Not a single grain came from the United States. Every ton was shipped from Brazil and Argentina. Beijing has completely rerouted its food supply, linking itself tightly with Latin America. That one decision has sent shockwaves through US farming communities. Soy prices are falling fast, and for many American farmers, selling their crops now means taking a loss. Imagine spending months planting, watering, and harvesting, only to earn less than it costs to grow. Farmers are now caught between collapsing prices and rising costs. Tractors, fertilizers, and tools have all become more expensive because of tariffs. And with interest rates still high, loans are crushing the people who feed the nation. Thousands of farms are on the brink. The last time this happened, back in 2018 and 2019, Trump had to spend $28 billion in emergency relief just to stop mass bankruptcies. Now the crisis is even deeper. China's stopped buying entirely. Zero soybeans, zero corn. It's not a slowdown. It's a shutdown that could last for years. This time, the bailout won't be in the billions. It could climb into the hundreds of billions. But every dollar printed to save the farms pushes America deeper into debt. The deficit is already ballooning, and the choices ahead are brutal. Hand out tax cuts and the government bleeds revenue. Print bailout checks and inflation roars back. Either way, the economic wall is closing in. Cotton farmers are losing around $400 per acre. Soybean growers over $100 per acre. And that's before accounting for higher interest on loans. Even with the Federal Reserve trimming rates, the relief is barely noticeable. Agricultural debt in 2025 alone has crossed $33 billion, Money owed before a single seat is even in the ground. So while Trump tweets about winning and restoring balance, the real picture is far darker. America's losing leverage in the global market it once dominated. China has flipped the script, securing its resources, strengthening its trade partners, and watching quietly as Washington drowns in its own rhetoric. The trade war that was supposed to make America stronger is instead exposing its weakest points: dependence, debt, and denial. This isn't just an economic standoff anymore. It's a shift in global power. And as Beijing tightens its grip on the world's supply chains, the US finds itself fighting a battle it started but no longer controls. China isn't slipping behind, it's locking in control. Bit by bit, it's tightening its grasp on the world's most critical resources, shaping the future of manufacturing, and weaving itself deeper into the global economy. The very regions that once looked to Washington for guidance now look east. While Beijing secures mines, ports, and supply lines, America is drowning in its own economic whirlpool, pouring billions into subsidies just to keep farmers and factories from collapsing under their own weight. The trade war that was supposed to restore American power has instead exposed its limits. What was meant to make the US stronger has revealed a painful truth. The system that once ruled the world is no longer built to compete with China's pace, precision, and patience. Washington keeps projecting confidence, but behind the curtain, it's scrambling to hold the pieces together. China, meanwhile, moves quietly but decisively, signing long-term deals, buying up rare resources, and cornering markets that America used to dominate. Every time the US reacts, Beijing is already 3 steps ahead. And while American leaders make speeches about winning the future, China is out there building it, factory by factory, shipment by shipment, and contract by contract. The US economy now bleeds from the inside out, interest payments eating up a growing share of the budget, while tariffs and trade restrictions backfire at home. Farmers who once fueled America's backbone are being crushed by rising costs, lower prices, and collapsing export demand. China no longer buys what they grow, leaving warehouses full and pockets empty. The administration had no choice but to reverse course, injecting emergency cash just to prevent mass bankruptcies. The truth is, they can't afford to let agriculture fail while tech manufacturing collapses too. It would trigger a chain reaction across the entire economy. Yet the question lingers. If US companies can't produce domestically without burning through their savings, then what was this tariff war really for? The promised revival of American industry has turned into a cycle of confusion, and no one in Washington seems to have a clear plan for what comes next. When J.D. Vance once claimed that America would protect its workers and stop China from rising at its expense, the message sounded bold. But today, China has done exactly what Washington tried to prevent. It built a thriving middle class without depending on the US. Their people are earning more, consuming more, and building the industries of the future, while American farmers and factory workers face the opposite reality. The global market doesn't play favorites. It rewards efficiency and punishes arrogance. And right now the scoreboard isn't looking good for the US. Still, American politicians keep saying the country holds the upper hand, insisting that leverage lies in how China reacts. But those claims are starting to crumble. The mighty US dollar, the ultimate weapon of Washington's influence, turned into a tool of control under Biden and Bowman. And that decision shattered the world's trust. Nations began looking for other options, other currencies, other systems. America's dominance rests on an economy stretched thin by debt and uncertainty. And even a small external shock could send it spinning. China's rise, in contrast, is built on something far more substantial. For decades, it has methodically captured the supply chains that keep the global economy alive. From rare earth minerals to advanced batteries, from semiconductors to electric vehicles, it holds the keys to modern industry. And now, it's flexing that power, restricting exports of lithium materials and advanced manufacturing equipment, daring the world to find alternatives. Ironically, this strategy came straight from America's playbook. Trump launched the first chip bans to weaken Beijing's tech sector. But now China has flipped that same move back at the US, and it's working. In the semiconductor race, China is closing the gap fast. Its engineers are innovative, its state funding is massive, and its material control is unmatched. The US can't say the same for its battery or EV industry. American companies are plagued by delays, shortages, and cost overruns. Even new EV factories, like Hyundai's US project, are struggling to stay on schedule. The uncomfortable truth is that China controls roughly 80 to 90% of the global battery supply chain. Nearly every critical part, cathodes, anodes, and cells, originates in Chinese plants. The rest of the world simply doesn't have the capacity to replace that dominance. South Korea, Japan, and Europe might produce some, but nowhere near enough to fill the void, and buying from them would still trigger US tariffs, driving prices even higher. If China decided to block battery exports altogether, the effect would be devastating. The global EV industry outside China would go dark. The US would be forced to rebuild its entire supply chain from scratch, an endeavor that would take over a decade and cost trillions. You can print money, but you can't print lithium mines or supply networks. That's why Beijing's control over real, physical industries is far more dangerous than any financial weapon America has ever used. Meanwhile, Chinese automakers are advancing at lightning speed. Their cars are cheaper, more efficient, and technologically ahead of most Western competitors. Brands like BYD have already surpassed Tesla in total deliveries, hitting nearly 580,000 vehicles last quarter, compared to Tesla's 500,000. That gap keeps widening, and the world is taking notice. Even if the US tries to push a Buy American policy for EVs, high domestic production costs would make those vehicles too expensive for most consumers. Eventually, American automakers might have no choice but to move operations to China, because that's where the supply, efficiency, and technology already exist. If that happens, the economic fallout would be brutal. Building a new supply chain at home would mean massive borrowing, rising deficits, and skyrocketing national debt. Add tariffs and protectionist policies on top, and the result would be a perfect financial storm, one America might not be able to weather. Tesla and other companies could easily expand their Chinese facilities instead, because the math simply makes more sense. And yet Trump continues to sound confident. He insists America is stronger, that he and Xi share mutual respect, that tariffs are America's secret weapon. He praises Xi as smart and tough, claiming they'll find a way forward. But the facts tell a different story. This trade war has become a lesson in overconfidence, a demonstration of what happens when political posturing collides with economic reality. It proves one thing above all else. You should never make promises you can't deliver on, because once the bluff is called, the world doesn't forget. So the question now is, how far will this go? Will China tighten the screws further, using its control over energy, batteries, and technology to push America to the edge? Or will Washington finally face the truth that tariffs and slogans can't compete with decades of industrial strategy? One thing's for sure. The storm that's forming isn't just another trade dispute. It's the beginning of a deeper realignment of global power. And this time, the outcome won't be decided by who shouts louder, but by who controls the foundation of the future. Stay alert, stay informed, and keep watching closely. Because what's happening now isn't just an economic shift. It's a turning point in history, one that will decide who truly leads the modern world.